Well, I've read chapters 24 through 30 of A Storm of Swords, and man, these chapters felt haunted. Not merely dark, haunted. Haunted by old stories, old prophecies, old songs, and old guilt. And more than anywhere else in A Song of Ice and Fire, these chapters these chapters felt very much like George R. R. Martin having a discussion, or maybe argument, but that may be a little bit too strong of a word, but having a engaged with the ideas of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. A bit of an argument, but a little bit more than that. More of engaging with the ideas, especially with their ideas about myth, morality, temptation, and the nature of evil. These chapters ask some enormous questions. What do stories do to us? What happens when prophecy becomes political? Can evil be fought without becoming evil yourself? And perhaps most importantly, what if fairy tales are true, but only partially true? And the Bran chapter, feels very important to me, because the story of the Mystery Knight feels almost like a Tolkienian legend. There's a hidden knight, a wrong set right, a humble outsider elevated, and honor defended at a tourney. It feels like something that's like an old Arthurian romance, or maybe something out of the Silmarillion, like the Beren and Luthien tale. It feels very English, an English legend. And Bran responds exactly the way readers respond to myths. The Mystery Knight should win the tourney. Because Bran instinctively wants narrative justice. The bad knights should lose. The humble hero should triumph. The wolf maid should be crowned queen of love and beauty. That's the moral architecture of a fairy tale. But Mira says that's a sadder story. And that line changes everything, because Martin constantly begins with the structure of heroic romance and then follows the emotional consequences afterward. Tolkien often moves from sorrow in the eucatastrophe, the sudden joyous turn. Martin frequently moves the opposite way, from beauty in the tragedy. You could call that the Downton Abbey move, because every time there's a baby born on Downton Abbey, watch out, because they're going to rip your heart out. And Martin frequently moves from beauty into tragedy. Yet he still loves the old stories. That's important. He's not mocking them, he's grieving them. And then one detail that crushed me emotionally is that Bran wants the green men to heal him. He wants to walk again, to become a knight, to belong inside the songs. And this makes Bran deeply Tolkienian, because Tolkien's work is filled with longing for restoration. The return of the king, the healing of the Shire, the restoration of broken things. Even one of Tom Bombadil's songs at the very beginning, Tom mentions until the world is mended. There's a longing for the mending of the world. Bran's desire feels almost like Frodo dreaming of the undying lands when he's in the House of Bombadil. And yet Martin gives that longing a sharper edge. Bran doesn't merely want glory, he wants escape from his body, which is devastating, especially when he thinks a day would be enough. Not a lifetime, just one day as a whole being again. Which is an incredibly poignant line. And then Davos and Melisandre, their scene fascinated me, because it feels almost like George R.R. Martin debating directly with C.S. Lewis. Lewis hated reductionist dualism. He despised the idea that reality could be simplified into neat ideological binaries. And Melisandre's worldview is exactly that simplification. One is black, the other white. Ice and fire, darkness and light, life and death. She sees the universe as absolute cosmic opposition, which is very Manichaean and very apocalyptic. And Lewis warned repeatedly about this mentality. In the Screwtape Letters, evil often works by flattening complexity into abstraction. And Melisandre does precisely that. She transforms humans into symbols. Davos's sons become a lesson. Stannis becomes Azor Ahai. People stop being people. They become pieces in prophecy. That's why Davos matters so much. Because Davos resists abstraction. His answer is one of the greatest lines in the books. My heart is full of doubts. Not certainty, doubt. And Martin presents doubt here almost as moral honesty. Davos refuses ideological intoxication, which is very Lewisian. Lewis distrusted people who claimed absolute certainty in earthly conflicts. And Melisandre is terrifying precisely because she possesses absolute certainty. The scene also echoes Tolkien's deepest themes because the temptation Melisandre offers is fundamentally the temptation of power through righteous means. That's the Lord of the Rings in a nutshell. The temptation of power through righteous means. Think of Boromir or Saruman, even Galadriel. The temptation is always use terrible power for a good purpose. And you can actually see that very well also in Gandalf. I highly suggest, if you haven't seen it, Nerd of the Rings has a great video. What if Gandalf took the One Ring? I don't know if that's the exact title, but Nerd of the Rings video on what if Gandalf took the One Ring is an excellent video. Melisandre believes utterly in her righteousness, which makes her very dangerous. She's convinced she is saving the world. And Tolkien consistently portrays this as the most perilous kind of evil. The corruption of good intentions. Davos instinctively recoils because he still sees human cost. He still remembers sons, faces, screams. Prophets forget individuals. Davos remembers them. And then we come to Jon and Ygritte. And this section we get, I'd already made a earlier video on just 2 chapters, because we got the famous you know nothing Jon Snow earlier. This section, there is so many you know nothings. Like it kept on repeating it. It became a refrain. That now I get why it's like so like everywhere on the internet. Why you hear it so often? Because like it becomes a refrain. You know nothing, Jon Snow. These chapters transformed that famous line for me. But it still has a bit of a tragic it's still it's become a refrain now, like because it's mentioned so often, but it still retains a bit of tragedy. It's still tragic because Ygritte still means something quite profound. Jon literally does not understand the world she inhabits. And more importantly, he doesn't understand history. Ygritte says just a chilling line. I'm reading a rented library book through Libby. So, but like even so, I still had to highlight the ebook line. This wall is made o' blood, which sounds almost biblical. or almost like something you might read in Cormac McCarthy, or or the Book of Amos. Just a brief, terse line. This wall is made o' blood. The wall stops being architecture. It becomes accumulated sacrifice. Ancient violence fossilized into civilization. In Tolkien, landscapes carry moral memory. There's the Dead Marshes, Moria, the Pelennor. History saturates the geography. And Martin seems to do the same thing, but with more bitterness. The wall is not merely wonder, it's trauma made permanent. And Ygritte understands this in her bones. John still romanticizes, but Ygritte remembers graves. And then comes this incredible line. We opened 500 graves and let all those shades loose in the world. That's pure Gothic myth. We opened 500 graves and let all those shades loose in the world. Suddenly, the wildlings stop feeling like barbarians. They become desperate people trying to survive an apocalypse. The Horn of Winter becomes almost analogous to forbidden power in Tolkien. Something ancient, world changing, dangerous. But Martin again complicates the myth. The search itself desecrates the dead. Even the attempt to survive unleashes horror, which is a recurring theme. There are very few clean victories. And then the Daenerys chapters are extraordinary because they place her at the exact intersection of liberation and corruption. And yet, she wants to free slaves, which is genuinely noble. And yet, to accomplish it, she must engage in bargaining. So, engage in bargaining that's so morally horrifying, it nearly destroys her. Selling Drogon feels almost sacramental. Uh, it feels like a betrayal. The line, the mother of dragons has sold her strongest child, is just so devastating because Dany herself feels the moral ugliness of it. And this is where she differs from many conquerors in fantasy. She still suffers morally. She has not become numb. And I think that matters. The fact that she's still suffering. Because in Tolkien, evil often begins in domination. the desire to control wills, and the unsullied are the ultimate domination. Humanity is erased for efficiency. They have no names, no selves, no future. Even Lewis would recognize this immediately because it resembles the abolition of man in his book, That Hideous Strength. Pure functionality replaces personhood. And Danny's instinctive horror at that system is profoundly important. She refuses to see them merely as military assets. And I think that's why freeing Missandei matters so much. The first thing Danny restores isn't power, it's identity, a name. And then the exchange between Danny and Missandei might be one of the quietest, beautiful moments in the book. And what really surprised me was we get the we get a mention of that phrase again, Valar Morghulis, which I think is the first time we've seen it in a non-Arya setting. Usually it's been Arya's chapters where we've come across it. But now this is Daenerys. All men must die. But then Danny adds, but not for a long while, we may pray. Which sounds like Tolkien's treatment of mortality. Death is real and inevitable, part of the world, but still mourned, still resisted, still humanly tragic. Martin's world can be cynically political, but moments like this reveal deep compassion underneath. And then we arrive at one of the most painful chapters in this section. In the series, really. That's Sansa's wedding. And here Martin most distinctly dismantles the fantasy of courtly romance. Because Sansa has lived on stories her whole life. Knights, songs, beauty, marriage. And every single element becomes grotesquely inverted. The king humiliates her. The groom can't properly cloak her. The fool becomes a stool. The laughter of the court replaces joy. It's just horrifying because the ceremony still follows the outward form of fairy tale marriage. But the spirit is dead. It's like reading a corrupted Arthurian romance. Everything symbolic remains, but emptied of goodness. And the Tyrell girls abandoning Sansa hurts almost as much as the wedding itself. Because she realizes courtly friendship was conditional. It was political, fragile. But then comes the bedroom scene. And it's so emotionally complicated. maybe the most emotionally complicated scene Martin's written so far. Because Tyrion wants genuine love, not compliance or fear or duty. Love. And he suddenly realizes Sansa is terrified. Not not merely disgusted, but terrified. There's the line, all she felt was pity, and pity was death to desire. That's brutally perceptive writing. Tyrion understands instantly that pity cannot become love. And for all his flaws, he refuses to force her. Which matters enormously, especially in Westeros. But Martin also refuses to romanticize the moment. Because Tyrion is still wounded, still bitter, and still humiliated. Mercy doesn't magically heal emotional pain. And this is one of Martin's greatest strengths, because moral choices still hurt. So, what struck me most about these chapters is how deeply Martin still believes in moral struggle, even while dismantling fantasy illusion. And that's where he resembles Tolkien and Lewis more than I think a lot of people realize. All three writers believe evil is real, not merely social or psychological, but real. But Martin differs in where he locates heroism. Tolkien often places heroism in the preservation of hope. Lewis places it in spiritual clarity. But Martin places it in moral endurance amid confusion. Davos is doubting. Tyrion is refusing. Sansa is enduring. Dany is grieving. And Jon is failing to understand but still trying. His heroes aren't pure, but they continue choosing humanity in systems designed to erase it. And maybe that's why these books feel so powerful. Because beneath all the cynicism, George R. R. Martin still believes choices matter. Even in darkness. Maybe especially in darkness. Well, I'll leave y'all with that. uh, I will see y'all next time as I begin the next section, beginning with chapter 31. Y'all have a great day.